Claude Opus 5 scores 43.3% on Frontier Bench, while Fable 5 sits at 33.7%. And Opus 5 costs half the price to get there, $5 per million input tokens versus 10, and that gap changes the math on every production workload you're running right now. Both models just dropped and teams are already committing budgets, so getting this wrong is expensive. I'm comparing Claude Opus 5 versus Fable 5 across 4 real tests: context, reasoning, pricing, and latency. Every number I use is sourced, no vendor spin, no cherry picking. And honestly, the part that surprised me most wasn't the price gap or the benchmark lead. There's one specific test where Fable 5 still has a number that Opus 5 can't even answer yet, and that might be exactly what your workflow depends on. So this comparison is for developers, AI engineers, and anyone running production workloads who needs to pick one model and stick with it. If you're calling these APIs at scale, the price difference alone is thousands of dollars a month. And if you're building agentic pipelines where reasoning depth matters, picking the wrong one means slower outputs and worse results for the same spend. Test 1, context window and long document handling. Both models advertise 1 million tokens, but that number hides something because the real question is whether it actually remembers what it read at token 800,000. When it doesn't, your agent starts hallucinating, your summaries fall apart, and you're debugging a context rock problem at 2 a.m. What surprised me here is that on paper, these two are identical. Both have a 1 million token window and 128,000 output tokens. But I looked at the quality scores, and only Opus 5 has a published number, 1,861 ELO on GDP-Val AAV2, for long context knowledge work, and Fable 5 has no comparable figure. Community data also puts Fable 5's practical recall limit closer to 800,000 before things start degrading. Now I want to be honest about this. One, before we call it, the gap looks bigger than it probably is, because Fable 5 just doesn't have a published quality score, not because it definitely performs worse. And if you're not pushing past 800,000 tokens in practice, you might never feel the difference. Take the Opus 5 ELO advantage. With a grain of salt, since it's community reported, not an official Anthropic benchmark. Opus 5 takes test 1. I was expecting a flat tie since the raw specs match, but the quality data and the 800,000 practical limit for Fable 5 push Opus 5 ahead, and the beta 300,000 output ceiling is a nice bonus on top. Claude Opus 5 up 1-0. Test 2, reasoning depth and complex problem solving. This is the one that really costs you when a model gets it wrong, because a weak reasoner doesn't just give you a bad answer, it gives you a confident bad answer, and your agent runs with it for 10 more steps before you notice. Debugging or reasoning failure in a multi-step pipeline is brutal, so this dimension matters a lot. Okay, so on Frontier Bench version 0.1, Opus 5 scores 43.3%, and Fable 5 scores 33.7%. And that's a 9.6 point gap, which is honestly pretty hard to ignore. On Cursor Bench 3.2, it's basically a tie. Opus 5 is within 0.5% of Fable 5's peak, and OS World shows Opus 5 outperforming Fable 5 at 1/3 the cost, though I should flag that's a vendor claim, so take it with a grain of salt. Before we score this, I want to flag something. Fable 5 is the Subway Bench Pro leader at 80.3%, and there's no Opus 5 score available for that benchmark yet. So if your workflow is specifically heavy on software engineering tasks, the Frontier bench gap might not tell the whole story. And the reasoning lead for Opus 5 is real, but it's not universal across every coding task. Opus 5 takes test 2 on reasoning. Honestly, I was expecting this to be closer, given how Fable 5 is positioned, but a 9.6 point spread on Frontier bench is not a rounding error, and Claude Opus 5 now leads 2-0 while doing it at half the price per token, which is kind of wild. Test 3. API pricing and cost effectiveness. If you're running a few hundred queries a day, it barely matters, but the second you push into production with millions of tokens a month, a 2x price difference turns into a real budget conversation with your team. I pulled the official pricing pages, and the numbers are just flat out clean. $5 per million input tokens, Fable 5 is 10, and on output tokens, it's Opus 5 at 25 versus Fable 5 at 50. Exactly half the price across the board. And on Cursor Bench, Opus 5 hits near parity with Fable 5 while spending half as much per task, which is really interesting. Opus 5 takes test 3, and it's not close. I was expecting maybe a 20% price gap, not 50% across every single token type. And when a model costs half as much and still matches or beats on most benchmarks the cost effectiveness, math just breaks in Opus 5's favor. Claude Opus 5 leads 3-0 now. Test 4, response latency and real-time performance. If your app needs to feel snappy, a model that takes 109 seconds to first token is going to break the user experience completely, because nobody sits through that in a chat interface. But if you're running a background batch job overnight, latency matters way less and raw reasoning depth matters way more. All right, so here's where it gets complicated, and I want to be upfront about that. Opus 5 in low effort mode runs 52 to 54 tokens per second with a time to first token of about 2.8 seconds, which is super fast. But Fable 5 in max effort mode it's 63.4 tokens per second, and the time to first token balloons to 109 seconds. So these are different effort levels, and comparing them directly isn't really fair. And yeah, this is genuinely apples and oranges. We don't have Opus 5's max effort latency numbers yet, and we don't have Fable 5's low effort numbers either. So any head-to-head here is kind of pulling a lever on a slot machine. And the data we have is real, but it's not measuring the same thing on both sides, which is honestly the most important caveat in this whole comparison. This one's a tie, and I'm calling it that honestly. I was expecting to score this cleanly, but the effort level mismatch makes a clean verdict impossible right now. And Opus 5's 2.8 second time to first token is genuinely great for real-time use. But until we see max effort numbers for both, it stays split. That leaves us at Claude Opus 5.3, Fable 5.0, 1 tie. Claude Opus 5 wins on price, period. $5 input. That's it. $25 output per million tokens. Half of what Fable 5 charges, and it leads Frontier Bench by 9.6 points. 43.3% versus 33.7%, with a published long context quality score of 1,861 ELO and a 2.8 second time to first token in low effort mode. Fable 5 wins on software engineering. It leads SWE Bench Pro at 80.3%, and Opus 5 doesn't have a score there yet. So if your workload is heavily code focused, that gap is real, and it also hits 63.4 tokens per second in max effort mode while sharing the same 1 million context and 128,000 output token specs as Opus 5. Honestly, I went into this thinking Fable 5 would be closer across the board, and the 3-0 result with a tie surprised me. So here's the decision rule. If you need strong general reasoning, long context quality, and the best cost per result, go with Opus 5, $5 input. That's it. But if your work is mostly software engineering and SWE Bench Pro scores are the benchmark you trust, Fable 5 is still the leader there and worth the premium.